Welcome to Liddypod, Beatles banter with Bedford and Beasley.
Dave, it's been a while since we have done what we are going to do today, actually.
Do you want to rephrase that?
Okay. I'll tell you what. Okay, let's start this again. It's been a while since we did a Liddypod focused entirely on a single Beatle. We started off with Ringo. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Ringo might have been one of the very first ones that we did. And then we did George. And then we took a break because there were so many other things to talk about. But we're going to get back to that today. Can't help it, can we? So I'm picking it up off you. I'm spending too much time with you, Dave. So tell the listeners where we are.
We're here on 20 Forthlin Road in Allerton in Liverpool. Made famous because this is where Paul McCartney spent his Beatle years. Really, so from the age of, what was he, about 14 when he got here in 1955. But it's strange for getting here. Unlike with the other guys, you could say, watch this one, it's a long and winding road to get to Forthlin Road, because this was the 7th house that he'd lived in by the time he'd got to 13. So he was born North End of Liverpool in the Walton Hospital, lived in Sunbury Road, which is by Anfield, home of the mighty Reds, of course. They lived over in Wallasey, other side of the River Mersey. They lived out in Knowsley in a prefab house, very appropriately, prefab. They then lived in Everton. That's a swear word, which is why he's partly an Everton supporter. And then, by then, Mike had arrived, his brother, and his mum Mary had gone back to work. Instead of going to be a nurse in the hospital again, district nurse and midwife, ends up on this brand new housing estate which they were still constructing, which was out in Speke, far south of Liverpool. Lived in Western Avenue there. And then Mary said she didn't want to be a midwife anymore. And fair, I mean, the house goes with the job. So the health authority said, OK, you can be district nurse still. And we're a kind and compassionate organisation. You've got 7 days to find another house. And so they found another house on the Speke estate in Ardwick Road. But Mary always wanted better for her boys. And so that's how they end up here at 20 Forthlin Road in 1955. And this was a lovely house. And some of the stories Paul has told, you know, that there's a toilet inside and out. Now, if you go back, and if you haven't listened to the Ringo and George ones, you'll understand the full context of that. So you've got 2 toilets. It's got a bathroom. And the great thing about indoors is that you can do a complete loop. And you could run round the inside if the doors were open, which Paul always thought was fancy. So, this is how we end up here at 20 Forthlin Road in Allerton.
So he moved basically 7 times in the space of just 13 years, which is phenomenal for anyone. But the main reason behind so many moves was, well, in part connected to Mary's job.
Yeah, exactly. She'd obviously had worked in the hospital where Paul and Mike were born, up in Walton. And then in the middle of the war, Jim had a couple of moves linked to doing war work, because obviously he had to give up being the cotton broker. That was all put on hold. But yeah, it's when Mary decides to go back to work, but doesn't want to work in a hospital again. That's what prompts all the moves. The last one was aspirational, because she's still a district nurse when they moved to here. But it's just going up from a working class area to a lower middle class area in Allerton. You know, and she did have those aspirations for the boys. You know, they had elocution lessons to lose their Liverpool accents because it was a barrier. Suddenly, obviously, in the 60s, it became fashionable to have a Liverpool accent, and it still has mixed results now. So she wanted them, to be professionals of some sort.
We'll be showing some photographs if people haven't seen it, and maybe a little bit of video footage about the house as well. But I've got to say, when people come here, and especially UK visitors come here, and you tell them that this was actually, at the time, a council house. And just to explain for our overseas listeners, a council is sort of public housing, which at that time was the norm to do for most people. But people are quite surprised, UK visitors, when they find out that this was a council house. You just explain a little bit about the house, Dave.
Yeah, so the original ones, when we were looking at Ringo and with George, now Ringo's ones, they were sort of late 19th century. So built solidly. Obviously, there was a huge housing crisis before the Second World War. Then when there's thousands of houses demolished during the war, there's a bigger crisis. So they start building these brand new housing estates on the edge of the city, like with Speke. So you've got this different style of local council, local authority housing. So it's quite a nice one, red brick. And it just looks, it's a step up when you compare to what Ringo and George were living in as council houses. These are bigger. You're getting 3 bedrooms and you're getting bathrooms. And that's the big difference. And most people still, they rented back then. That was the thing to do. So the really nice house in a terrace, as we have them, as we call them. It's just for a nicer area. You can see the difference of those older council houses. And I know it's one of the things that Ringo's used to argue about when people said he grew up in the slums. He said that they weren't the slums. Now, Liverpool did have some bad housing, and there was a slum clearance, definitely. But these are really nicely built houses with a garden at the front and the back, which, of course, those older council houses didn't have gardens. So it's a nicer house. It's really nice here.
Yeah. It is a lovely house, and would have been fairly newly built at the time that the McCartney's moved in.
Yeah, it certainly would. You can see the difference with a lot of the house building that's pre-war, post-war, and the difference is huge, really. When you look at it, it's a lovely house. And I think it's the style of the brick built, the way these were done. It just stands out from some of the working class areas. You can just see that little bit of difference.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit, Dave, about Paul's time here. So it was 1955 when he moved here. He was 13 years of age with his mum, his dad, and of course his younger brother Michael as well. Fantastic move for the McCartney family, as you say, aspirational, to move from the Speak estate into a brand new area, a brand new estate in a quite a middle class area, Allerton. The happiness didn't last very long, sadly, did it?
No, because it's only the following year, at the end of October 56, that Mary died from breast cancer. Paul's only 14 years old. His world sort of fell apart. And it's amazing, that was quite a change in Paul's life, because he just started learning music. For his 14th birthday, he'd got a trumpet. His dad was a jazz musician and a big influence on Paul. There was always music in the house. That lovely Irish tradition of all the family comes around, there's the piano, everybody has their songs to sing. So he'd grown up with the musical tradition. Then his mum dies from cancer, and it's only 2 weeks after Mary had died, Paul goes to the Liverpool Empire to see Lonnie Donegan. Sees Donegan with his guitar and thinks, I want to do that. Goes to his dad and said, can I have a guitar? Now, Jim has so much of an influence in Paul's career. Yeah, as an absolute gentleman. I've never heard a bad word said about him by anybody. And so they change over, and trumpet goes in, Paul comes out with the guitar. And it's been interesting with the lyrics book that Paul's just brought out. The first song Paul ever wrote was I Lost My Little Girl. And he realised over time that's him talking about losing his mum. But he transfers that into a relationship between a boyfriend and girlfriend. But that's obviously what it was about. And it's one of those big things, and I know Paul's been asked this a few times. If his mum hadn't died, would he have been a musician? Because really she wants him probably to be a teacher. And there were times when he considered that, when the Beatles thing wasn't really happening. But how his life was changed by his mum dying. He finds his guitar, and Mike had said several times, Paul's way of dealing with grief was music. That's what he found. That's how he dealt with it. So it was a massive change. And of course, Jim, again, bless him, he's got 2 teenage boys to bring up. Now, he does that with the help of his family, Auntie Gin being one of those. And that's another of the houses, the one up in Diners Lane in Highton, that Paul and Mike spend some time at as well. Jim was working, etc. So Paul was a bit of a nomad, modran, but had a really good family and strong family roots there.
So this is really a crucial house, Dave, because it was the last house that Paul lived in Liverpool before he moved down to London. It was the house where he lost his mum. It was the house where he sort of discovered music. And then it was the house where he was living when he met John as well.
Yeah, that's the key thing. So he loses his mum at the end of October 56, and then obviously 6th of July 57, Paul and John meet for the first time. And this house becomes, I mean, the National Trust tried to call it birthplace of the Beatles. What? Another one? I mean, they've been born in so many different parts of Liverpool, haven't they? Dear me. It's not quite that, but, you know, this is important. The Quarrymen rehearse here. Jim is there to encourage Paul with his music. Mike, of course, was joining in initially until he had that bad accident and broke his arm and damaged nerves and stuff. Or Mike could well have ended up being the permanent drummer. So the Quarrymen rehearse here. But the key thing for the National Trust, why they bought it, and this was back in 1995, was that John and Paul would write songs here. And of course, with Jim being at work and the house empty, Paul and John would sag off school. And sag off, I'm sure you can guess, but playing truant. And again, one of those lovely stories Paul tells, that trying to be grown up, you know, he'd have a cup of tea and he'd get his dad's pipe and put tea leaves in the pipe and try and smoke that. That's bizarre. Teenage lads, who knows? But this is where John and Paul did a lot of songwriting, and a number of times they've mentioned this. And again, thinking of Paul's lyrics book, you know, they had the school exercise book from the Liverpool Institute. That's another Lennon-McCartney original. And they had like 100 songs. And the great thing with Get Back is that we actually got to hear a couple of those songs. When they were looking for material, they went back to the very, very beginning. And we're performing some of those first songs that John and Paul wrote here. So it's very, very important. Probably the most famous of the songs and one of the biggest influences is She Loves You. I mean, how many times have we seen a headline that has yeah, yeah, yeah in it? I mean, it's been overused so many times. But when John and Paul were writing that, they would then go into the next room, see Paul's dad and say, we've got this, what do you think? And they play it to him. And he says, it's very nice, but it's all those Americanisms. Can't you say yes, yes, yes? Can you imagine She Loves You? Yes, yes, yes. But bless him. It's a generational thing, isn't it?
So one of the reasons that they would come here was because sadly Mary had died. Jim was at work. The house was available. They could sag off, play truant, and he wouldn't be noticed. But also, John's house was not the best place to practice, was it?
Well, no, because Mimi, as we know, didn't like the guitar. Famously said, the guitar's all right for a hobby, but you'll never make a living from it, which John had made into a brass plaque and put in her house when he bought her the house down in Dorset. So, yeah, there was no real freedom to practice Mendips. But here, there was all the freedom. And Jim was doing that to encourage the lads. You know, so Paul learns to play piano. He had, you know, a handful of piano lessons. Got very, very bored and just taught himself. When Mike damaged his arm, he learnt on Mike's drum kit. So that's why he's so talented musically, because Jim was such an encouragement. You know, he would play songs to Paul and explain, you know, like, listen to here, you've got the melody, you've got the harmony, there's the brass, the strings, there's the bass. Paul was learning musical theory without studying musical theory because of what Jim was teaching him, which is why this house is so important. And the good thing is, you know, with both Paul and Mike, they've always said how important Jim was to them as a father. Because of course we can't forget, Mike becomes the Scaffold. You know, and the Scaffold have the #1 hit with Lydia the Pink. They tour the world. You know, they have a massive career as well. So the two lads who quite possibly would never have had a musical career had their mum survived. I suppose that's always the biggest sadness, I think, when you get someone who's become so successful. You know, and look what Paul's done. Not just musically, what he's done for Liverpool as well, you know, with Lip, and, you know, he's been such a supporter of the city. How proud his mum would have been to have seen that. And she's missed that. But they've done her proud, and of course Paul has commemorated her in song. You know, obviously we think of Let It Be as the main one, but, you know, she's there as an influence all the way through as well. So it's a very important place.
And this house also, photographically, is back in the headlines as well, isn't it? Because Mike McCartney, very, very keen amateur photographer when he was younger. People will remember a photograph on the cover of one of Paul's solo albums, but we now have the lyrics and, of course, the front cover is that photo. Just explain that, Dave.
Yeah, so it's one of those great things that with Mike being such a keen photographer, he took some wonderful photos, particularly of John and Paul working on songs. I think amongst my favourite Beatles photos is John and Paul with their songbook on the ground there in the front room of Forthlin Road, working on the song, and the hands are strumming away, and that for me it captures everything, and it's brilliant. Of course, you've got the famous photo with Paul sat in a deck chair in the back garden here at Forthlin Road with his guitar, and it's just a wonderful photo. And Mike is a brilliant photographer. He's taken some amazing, iconic images, and he, of course, has brought out a new book with Genesis, a book of all of his photographs, which include the very first colour photo of the Quarrymen. It's taken in 1958. So between the two of them, it's so creative. Mike's always had this very zany sense of humour as well, which is what the Scaffold were doing. Very dry wit, sometimes very bizarre and stuff, but funny with it. And we're just so grateful that Mike had the forethought to be taking all these photos. And that really helped when the National Trust bought this property. They wanted to recreate the inside as to how it would have been. But of course they got Mike's photos, so they match up with the wallpaper, with the furniture, etc. It was harder to do at Mendips because there were very few photos taken in there. But we had Mike's photos here. So the National Trust had done a fantastic job. It looks so authentic. And of course Paul has tried so many times to come back and visit. And ironically, the song, one of those famous songs of Let 'Em In, is sort of don't let him in, and because there's not been someone living here as a curator, he's come back on a few occasions, wanted to go inside and never could. But of course he got the chance back in, was it 2018?
2018
with James Corden. Go on, you remember, tell them all about it.
Well, that was famously the day when Paul McCartney returned to Liverpool for the Carpool Karaoke. And you will remember as well, Dave, that there'd been rumours about somebody coming into Liverpool. But to be honest, Dave, for those people who don't know, Liverpool now is a hotbed for filming. And there are film stars here with regularity. So, it could have been anyone. And also I recall seeing the Philharmonic dining rooms in town with film crews setting up in the week prior to. This is where he gave the concert at the end of Carpool Karaoke. But again, it was just another film set. You drive past them and almost through them sometimes every single day in Liverpool. So nobody again thought about it. And actually, I got to know of that day because one of my guiding colleagues, Jackie Spencer, was finishing off a private tour down at the Beatles statues at the waterfront with a family of 4 from America. And she said she recalls these 2 cars pulling up. Out of one of the cars, out jumps Paul McCartney and James Corden and walks over to the statues. Well, of course, her group thought, we didn't pay for this. Is this part of the tour?
Every time.
So she put that onto Twitter, and then it exploded, And obviously, one of the places he was down to visit, and he did, was here at 20 Forthlin Road. And also, there was a magical mystery tour that arrived at the same time. So again, those people were thinking, wow, is this the VIP tour? You get to meet McCartney as well. So yeah, he did come back, didn't he? And it was a really lovely piece. If people have not watched it yet, they should look at that bit in particular.
Well, it should do. And it's one of those, I started getting messages from all over the world, sort of, are you there? What's happening? Have you met him? And here's one of those ironies, okay? So while Paul is in Liverpool, I was in Dublin. Right, because one of the things that I've done a number of times is I've been flown over to Dublin. I then get on a cruise ship.
Yeah.
I give a talk in the evening all about the Beatles and Liverpool, and then we sail into Liverpool the following morning, and I get off. So while Paul was here, I was in Dublin waiting to get on a cruise ship to tell him all about the Beatles and Liverpool. When there's a Beatle in Liverpool, and I'm not. Oh.
Well, I was slightly closer, Dave, but so close and yet so far. I was on the Wirral on the other side of the river doing a job, and there's no way I could just drop the job and come back. So I was watching all this Twitter traffic, and I was like 10 miles away on the other side of the river and didn't get a sniff. So that was it. But he did come back here. He went into the house, obviously all prearranged with the National Trust. He spoke to James Corden about, all those things you've just been talking about. And it was really nice for him to recall that, wasn't it?
Well, it was, and you could just see the enjoyment as he goes back in, particularly because it's not just like visiting an old house. It's visiting his former house that looked like it would have done when he lived here. Now, with the wallpaper, the furniture and the way it's been done. And you can see that enjoyment. And there's little stories coming back. Yeah, I love the bit when in the back garden, because one of the things Paul and Mike would do if they were out late was shinny up the drain pipe and in through the window. And he sort of hints that, shall I give that a go now? I think, no, don't kill McCartney on a drain pipe, please.
Yeah, so yeah, for lots and lots of reasons, this is a very special house. It sits alongside certainly Mendips, where John lived, and we'll cover Mendips in a later Liddypod. But in some respects, you might argue that because of the music right in here, that it really stands out amongst all the Beatles houses, and indeed within British contemporary music. One of the places where significant music writings take place. So Paul left here in 1963, along with the other four Beatles. What happened to the house then, Dave?
Well, as they all made some money in 65 and 66, all four of the Beatles then bought houses for their parents. And Paul bought Rembrandt, which is over in Heswell on the far side of the Wirral Peninsula, opposite Liverpool. Looks out over the Dee estuary, over to North Wales. Gets this lovely big house for Jim. So Jim could retire from work. And he'd worked hard all his life, as most people did back then. He started work at the age of 14. So he had this lovely garden. He was a very keen gardener. And Paul bought him this lovely house to retire in. Spent a lot of money putting in all the central heating, doing everything that his dad could ever want. And he had a very happy retirement over there. And of course, later meets Angie and gets married again. So Angie McCartney, who's still going in her 90s, legend down in LA. So yeah, all the Beatles looked after their parents. It's one of the first big things that they did. So that was it. 1965, Forthlin, that was it. The McCartneys left for the very last time. And it wasn't until 30 years later that the National Trust then buy the house. And it's almost exactly what you were saying just now with looking at Mendips. People said, the National Trust would buy Mendips, and they wouldn't. They said, we've got a Beatle house. And for them, this was important not just for McCartney, but this is important for the Beatles, with the songwriting, with the rehearsing and all that kind of stuff as well. This was the important one to have. And it would be hard to argue that there's a more important house in Britain, particularly when it comes to contemporary arts, contemporary music. This was the place.
Yeah, it really was. And I recall that when the house, 95, as you say, Dave, it was bought, and at that time it didn't look like it did today externally, because as you would do, people had renovated the house over the years, they'd modernised it. So the National Trust, and for overseas visitors, the National Trust is a huge charitable organisation that looks after properties of historic value all over the country, and they own lots of properties, lots of coastline and countryside. Very, very wealthy organisation, but it is a charity. Everyone can join the National Trust, but they do things very well and very meticulously and properly. And so what they did, as you say, Dave, they set about renovating the house internally and externally to look exactly as it did at the time. And that includes the windows, because my understanding is, having spoken to the National Trust, the windows were taken from a house in the next road. They bought them off the residents, because they were the same windows, put them in, and then matched up the colours as well of maroon and magnolia for the front of the house, which is one of the colours that was used by the City Council at the time. So that's why, probably, as you say, even more so than Mendips, we can say that this house looks exactly as it did at the time.
Yeah, it's really authentic. The other way to tell which one it is, you look up for the television aerials, and it's the house without the television aerial. Yeah. It is ironic, isn't it, that when a house has been modernised, you have to unmodernise it and take the double glazing out and put the originals in. But yeah, National Trust has done a fantastic job with it. It's always a pleasure to come here to visit. And that's the great thing with the National Trust, is that you can go on the tour, and it's an amazing tour to go inside Paul's house, but go inside Mendips as well. And it's great, they've done such a fantastic job. And because it's a small tour, maximum about 15 people to a tour, so it's quite a personal one as well. You get a chance to walk around the house and see what it would have been like. And And so it's a real nice glimpse into 1950s Liverpool of what it was like.
Absolutely, Dave. And the garden, you know, they put a privet hedge back in and created the garden to broadly speaking the way it would have looked at the time. And it is fabulous. And if you have not done the National Trust tour, do book in advance, because as Dave says, there's only 15 seats on the minibus. Can't say at the moment what next season's tour programme will look like, because it is closed for the winter at the moment as we speak here just before Christmas. But you do need to book in advance. If you don't book in advance, you may well be disappointed on the day. So Dave, that's Forthlin Road, number 20 Forthlin Road, the third of our focuses on a single Beatle. The next one, maybe not the next Liddypod, but at some time in the future we will go to Mendips, and we'll do Mendips as well. But we are going to post a few photos and a little bit of video on Liddypod as well. If we can get to grips with the technology, we're gonna give it a go, aren't we, Dave?
Look at us getting all into the 21st century. How technical is this? You know, and the problem is, as we've always said, we have the perfect faces for radio, so we may regret going on to video, but what the? Let's scare the listeners, why not?
We will definitely regret it. But Dave, thanks very much. It's been good to see you again. We are obviously standing outside today, so there's no breakfast in sight. So the next one has definitely got to be a breakfast.
Well, I'm close to passing out at this moment. You know, how can we get to this time in the morning and I've not had a full English breakfast?
Especially not on a Liddypod day, anyway. Exactly. Dave, good to see you. Speak to you again.
And it's a happy Christmas, of course. By the time this goes out, we're just before Christmas, so happy Christmas, everyone. Happy New Year. We've got lots more plans for Liddypod in 2022.
You've been listening to Liddypod, Beatles banter with Bedford and Beasley.